I'm Rob, and I get a chance to talk a little bit about Passion Week and continue the series that we've been doing here at the chapel this week. It's Thursday. Things are starting to get really exciting now. Tomorrow's Friday, the crucifixion. Most importantly, Sunday's right around the corner, and Resurrection Sunday is the highlight of our Passion Week. Just to review a little bit, the Jewish nation really felt like the Passover was a very important festival. For 30 days, they had a regimented cleansing period where they would get ready for the Passover, and then they would, many of them, tens of thousands of families would journey down to Jerusalem to spend it in corporate worship, corporate sacrifice. Just to review a little bit, most likely Jesus and the apostles did this journey. Jesus would had numerous times come to Jerusalem for Passover. First as a young boy, then as a young man, and even during his time of 3 years of ministry with the apostles, had journeyed to Jerusalem for Passover. Many times they would travel from where they normally would be located in the Sea of Galilee. That's about 80 miles north of Jerusalem. So they would start off and just walk those 80 miles. And as he walked and would stay in towns, he would teach and heal with the apostles. On Saturday, most likely, they were located in Jericho, and they took about the approximately 20-mile trip over the mountains between Jericho and Bethany. Ironically, it's the same path that he used in his parable, the Good Samaritan. And it was a very mountainous path, dangerous path, and the apostles and him ended up in Jericho Saturday night prior to Palm Sunday. And the Bible tells us that they stayed at Mary, Martha, and Lazarus' home that evening. Next morning, they got up. They made about a 55-minute journey towards Jerusalem from Mary, Martha, and Lazarus' home. And along the way, Palm Sunday, the triumphant entry. I thought Jason just did a wonderful job this past Sunday talking about the triumphant entry into Jerusalem, primarily from using Mark chapter 11 as his reference. And then he also cleansed the temple on Sunday. Then he would leave, either go and stay at the Mount of Olives or go back to Mary, Martha, and Lazarus' home and spend the evening, and then come back Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, where he would teach in the temple courts. We know that what is, the importance of what he taught during those days were a highlight. And then I think Curtis on Monday, Steve on Tuesday, and then Andrew yesterday just did a wonderful job with some of the lessons that Jesus taught from those teachings on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So now it's Thursday. The Passover meal is the highlight of the 8-day festival of Passover. And so the Jewish nation is really excited. You have tens of thousands of people in Jerusalem ready to celebrate this special meal. It was almost like a party for them as they were celebrating the Exodus from Egypt. And the excitement that was there would be without a doubt, but it would be a little bit different for Jesus in that his Passover with his 12 apostles were just a little bit different because of him knowing that this was his last Passover. And he needed to teach the apostles some special lessons as he got ready for the crucifixion and the resurrection. Picking up in the book of Mark, the Last Supper, I want to start with Mark 14, chapter 14, verse 12. And it's on the first day of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, which is Passover, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, Where do you want to go and make preparations to eat the Passover? So he sent two of the disciples, telling them, go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. In many cases, a lot of our biblical scholars actually believe that man carrying that water was John Mark, the author of the book of Mark. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house he enters, the teacher asks, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? He'll show you a large upper room, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there. You know, as we get excited about Passover and the meal that we're going to talk about here in a little bit, the Seder meal, I can't emphasize enough the importance of this week. If you look at the four books, the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we count up 89 chapters that make up those four books. Of those 89 chapters, 4 of them deal with Jesus' first 30 years of life, his childhood, his early adulthood. 85 chapters then reflect his 3 years of ministry. What's exciting to me and the importance of the Passion Week is of those 85 chapters, 27 of them, a third of the books, the third of the chapters of the gospel deal with just 1 week, the Passion Week. So that just shows you the emphasis that we need to place on the Passion Week and understand not only it was very, very important to Jesus as he walked through this last week of his life, but the relationship that we have to have in our importance that we place on these 7-8 days that make up the Passion Week. Once they had understood where the Passover meal was going to take place, it had to be done in a little bit of secrecy, because Judas was still a part of the apostles, and Jesus wanted to make sure that Judas didn't know where the Passover meal was going to take place. Therefore, that's why he sent out the 2 apostles to go and meet in this scripture references that we just read. That evening, they all came to take part in the Seder meal. The Seder meal had been something that was prescribed in Old Testament tradition as one of the very important festivals. It has a very distinct ritualistic approach to celebrate the exile, as I said, from that we read in the book of Exodus. And if you take a look at the actual prescribed order, there are 19 different steps that the Jewish nation would follow as they celebrated the Seder. And it all dealt with remembrance of what God had done, delivering his nation out of captivity. In today's world, we can still celebrate the Seder and walk through those prescribed order of rituals and actually apply it to Jesus. One thing I would really challenge you to do is this past week, Mary and Wade Ahola sent me a link to a Sunday message from the church that their granddaughter, Chloe Tyler, attends back in Bloomington, Illinois. The pastor there just did a wonderful, wonderful job of walking you through this Seder meal, all of the steps, explaining the importance of all the 5 cups that you partake in a Passover meal, and also the unleavened bread and how Jesus would have done that Seder meal that night. Some of the things that were really exciting about it is if you take a look at the 19 different steps, the 4th step is the hand washing, where in normal cases the leader of the Seder would actually take a pitcher of water, pour it 3 different times over each of the person's hands. They'd wash their hands with water and they'd dry them off. Jesus changed it a little bit that night. What he did is not only did he wash the hands, but then he also took the water, took his robe off, and sat down and kneeled down and washed the feet of his 11 apostles. Judas was already had left. And during this time, he talked about the importance of servanthood. He talked about how through Christ, we have the ability to not only be cleansed by bodily water, but also how Jesus will cleanse us and cleanse our souls. And that was the whole significance of washing of feet that night. And he actually did it right there in the prescribed order of the Seder meal. As you go down, there are, like I said, 5 different cups that they partake. I would highly recommend you get on that YouTube, that link that I talked about. What you have to do is just go to YouTube, look up or search for Vale Church, V-A-L-E Church, in Bloomington, Illinois. Go to the April 2nd service, and you can actually sit there and go through Pastors Ted Mack's description. He just does a wonderful, wonderful job of explaining each of the steps of that Seder meal and what Jesus would have been doing and the significance of each of the cups that they partaked in. The first cup that the Jewish nation does is a cup of sanctification. The second cup, the cup of deliverance. The third cup, right after meal, the meal that they actually eat, is the cup of redemption. And in Luke 22, it talks about, that is when exactly Jesus talked about the communion with the cup of redemption. And then the fourth cup is the cup of praise. And the fifth cup is a little bit different than it's Elijah's cup, and the significance of that is very important also. So what I'd really like you to do, again, I really challenge you I don't have the time to kind of walk you through each of these steps, and he just does such a wonderful job visually and also verbally of explaining that Passover meal that Jesus had and all the significance of each of those 19 steps, and especially the 5 cups of during the Seder meal. So that's Vale Church, Bloomington, Illinois, Bloomington, Illinois. Just look up the April 2nd, Good Friday video, and if you want to, it's the entire service. So if you want to skip worship, which actually is an excellent worship service, go right to about 16 minutes, 30 seconds in. That's when Pastor Mack starts his presentation. It's about 40 minutes long, and I will guarantee you that it will really make it very significant to see what Jesus actually did with that Seder meal and all. With that, I'd like to kind of close with 2 things to kind of think about as we celebrate this Thursday, is that Jesus didn't just stop then. As Jesus left the upper room and he was walking towards the Garden of Gethsemane, he continued to teach. If we look up John 15, verses 1 through 8, he has left the upper room. I can just visually see him going through the streets of Jerusalem, and you know the importance of wine and winemaking and grapes. And I know for a fact that we read that all along the walls of Jerusalem they would have grapes just kind of growing on the walls there in Jerusalem. And I can just see him doing an object lesson with these 11 apostles. Read with me John chapter 15, verse 1. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Speaking to the apostles. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither you can bear fruit unless you remain in me. Again, verse 5. I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. As a young boy, I was raised in a Baptist church, and I can remember the song, You Are the Vine, I Am the Branch. It always was very significant to me, and now to be able to relate it to Jesus' Passover day, the Thursday, as he walks from the upper room towards the garden, really means a lot to me. Bottom line is, Jesus Christ is the link that really nurtures and sustains us with our life with God. I think it's just really important that without Him, without the vine, the branches, me, I'm useless. And so really think about, those kind of things as you read scripturally and try to do it in a context of when He talked about it and what He was talking about. In closing, I'd like to talk a little bit about the garden. Jesus has now gone to the garden. He knows that soon Judas will come and he'll be arrested, and he'll start that terrible, terrible day of pain, suffering for you and me. And so he is going to go and he's going to pray. So if we look at Luke 22, verses 39 through 44, this talks a little bit about what Jesus does in the garden. Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives. Every night, he usually would either go back to Mary, Martha, or Lazarus' home, or a lot of times in between the teachings on Monday, Tuesday, he might just go out to the Mount of Olives and camp there with his disciples. Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw away beyond them, knelt down, and he prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Just like we have the ability, and when Jesus happened, what did God do? He sent him an angel. An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. What happened here is that Jesus is in tremendous stress. I don't think he was stressed because he knew he was going to die. I don't think he was stressed because he knew he was going to be crucified. I don't think he was worried about the nails. I don't worry he was too worried about the crown or the whips that were going to come the next day and all. But I think the stress came about, he knew that he was going to have to take yours and my sins to that cross the next day and permanently take away the sin that mankind had created. His blood is what was spilled to save you and I. Part of the Passover were the sacrifice of lambs, bulls, doves. And what that was that God had taken sin and he'd given a temporary release from that sin to the sacrificial letting of blood from animals. The other day I cut myself, and as I was bleeding, I was thinking that, that's God's way of healing me with that blood. It actually was going to coagulate and kind of create a little band-aid per se. And in many ways, that blood covered that injury. Just like the blood of those animals temporarily covered sin. But then, like normal, I picked at it a little bit, and what happened is I started bleeding again. And it had to happen all again. And that's exactly what happened with sacrificial animal sacrifices. It was temporary. They had to continually do it. Well, what Jesus took to the cross was a permanent fix for you and I. Bottom line is his sacrifice of blood saved you and I from sin. Not that we don't sin, but it was an eternal, permanent fix for sin. What he had to do was go to the cross. And he was so stressed out that he actually, those blood capillaries in his brow, in his head, burst and mixed with sweat blood and actually created what we read there in the book of Luke. The stress didn't come from knowing, like I said, he was going to die. The stress came from knowing that he had to take on the wrath of God. God hates sin. And by going to the cross, he was going to be separated from God for a period of time as he died on that cross so that you and I could have forgiveness of our sins. Passover is really, really important to the Jewish nation. It was probably the highlight of all of the 7 festivals. We can take the Passover, we can take the Seder dinner and apply it to a risen Christ. I challenge you again, please go to that Vale Church YouTube in Bloomington, Illinois, and watch that 45-minute session on just what the Seder meal signified as Jesus walked through it with his disciples and all. If need be, send me a text. My cell number is 541-401-0825, and I can actually send you the direct link if that would be easier for you to find that video. What a great series, what we've done. I'm so excited that tomorrow's Friday. Not that he died on the cross, but for what he did on that cross. Please come join us tomorrow at 6:30 here at the chapel as we have a Good Friday service and we have a short lesson on the crucifixion. Saturday, join us for a prayer time and candle vigil up at the barn, 6:30, as we prepare ourselves for Resurrection Sunday. And then Sunday, what a great celebration we're going to have here at the chapel. 9 o'clock, come, family scavenger hunt, time to get together as a church family for goodies and liquid refreshments, hot chocolate, whatever, and really have some quality time before we come into this church and we celebrate Resurrection Sunday through our worship and our teachings from the pulpit. Thank you. I wish you a great, great Thursday. Friday's tomorrow, but most importantly, Sunday's a coming. Have a great day.